Captain Aaron Novak felt the familiar tremor of the Alliance warship as it decelerated into Garrus Prime's orbit. Through the observation port, the dead planet loomed beneath them, a barren wasteland of acid deserts and skeletal mountain ranges. This would be their battlefield, their graveyard, or perhaps both. "Final briefing in 10 minutes. Captain," announced the ship's AI. "Command expects full attendance." Novak nodded silently, his eyes still fixed on the hostile world below. As commander of the Hell's Divers, humanity's elite orbital drop infantry, he had led landings on 18 hostile worlds. But something about Garrus Prime sent a chill through his battle-hardened nerves. The year was 2378, nearly 2 centuries since humanity had first ventured beyond their solar system. First contact had been peaceful, but peace rarely lasted in a universe of limited resources. The Alliance, a coalition of 7 sentient species, including humans, had been locked in territorial expansion against the Garrus Empire for 3 decades. Garrus Prime represented their opponent's spiritual and strategic heartland. Novak adjusted his combat exoskeleton, the midnight black armor emblazoned with the Hell's Divers insignia, a crimson silhouette of a human form plummeting through flames. His unit consisted of 12 of the finest soldiers humanity had produced, augmented with neural implants and hardened by countless drops into hostile territory. Their mission was simple, yet nearly impossible: establish a beachhead for the main Alliance invasion force. "Captain," a voice called from behind. Lieutenant Silas, the Keltian pathfinder assigned as their liaison, approached with unmistakable military precision. The tall, gray-skinned humanoid's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a characteristic Keltian gesture of formal acknowledgement. "The General has requested your input on drop coordinates before the briefing," Silas continued, his universal translator converting the complex harmonics of Keltian speech into clipped, emotionless English. Novak suppressed a grimace. The Keltians, the Alliance's technological powerhouse, viewed human soldiers with barely concealed disdain. To them, humans were primitive creatures who relied on brute force and instinct rather than the calculated precision the Keltians prided themselves on. "I'll be there momentarily," Novak replied, his tone neutral, despite his internal frustration. The command center buzzed with activity as holographic displays projected Garrus Prime's surface in exquisite detail. General Theron, the Keltian supreme commander of the operation, stood at the center, his elongated digits manipulating the tactical display with practiced efficiency. "Captain Novak," the general acknowledged without looking up. "Your Hell's Divers will deploy alongside Lieutenant Silas's Pathfinders. The primary objective is securing the Light Camp, the central defensive position controlling the Northern Hemisphere." Novak studied the projection. The Light Camp was a fortress built into a mountain range, heavily defended with anti-orbital batteries that could shred their dropships before they even entered the atmosphere. "With respect, General," Novak began, "these approach vectors won't work. The Garus defensive grid will detect and target any craft following such predictable trajectories." The general's 4 eyes narrowed simultaneously. "These vectors were calculated using our most advanced algorithmic simulations. Captain, they represent the optimal balance of speed and stealth." Simulations don't account for Garrus adaptive targeting systems," Novak countered, stepping forward to manipulate the hologram. "My unit has encountered similar defenses on Proxima Centauri 4. They learn and anticipate. We need multiple diversionary drops followed by a main insertion using this canyon approach." A tense silence filled the command center. The Keltian officers exchanged glances that betrayed their skepticism. "Captain Novak," General Theron said finally, his voice carrying the artificial calm of someone restraining genuine irritation. "While your combat experience is noted, this operation will proceed according to established tactical doctrine. The Pathfinders will lead the initial insertion with your Hell's Divers, providing secondary support. Novak felt his jaw clench. My soldiers aren't support units. General, they're the most combat-experienced drop troops in the Alliance. With all due respect, theoretical models won't mean much when anti-aircraft fire starts tearing through your pathfinders. Your objection is noted, Captain, the general replied coldly. But the decision stands. Prepare your unit for deployment at 600 hours. You are dismissed. As Novak turned to leave, Lieutenant Silas fell into step beside him. The Keltian's expression was unreadable, but something in his stance suggested discomfort. The general's approach follows Keltian battle doctrine precisely, Silas offered, his voice lowered. It has proven effective in 87% of simulated scenarios. And how many actual combat drops have you participated in, Lieutenant? Novak asked sharply. Silas hesitated. This will be my first planetside combat operation, Captain. Novak stopped walking and faced the Keltian officer directly. Then I suggest you pray to whatever gods the Keltians worship, that your simulations account for the chaos of actual combat. Because where we're going, theory meets reality in the most violent way possible. As Novak strode away, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him. In less than 12 hours, his Hell's Divers would drop into hell itself, and he couldn't shake the feeling that many wouldn't return. The deployment bay hummed with pre-mission activity as Novak addressed his team. 12 men and women in black exoskeletons stood at attention, their faces a study in controlled tension. Command has decided we'll be playing second fiddle to the Pathfinders on this one, Novak announced without preamble. But that doesn't change our objective or our methods. We drop, we fight, we win. Period. Lieutenant Mara, the youngest Hell's Diver but already a veteran of 7 drops, stepped forward. Captain, is it true the Keltians overrode your drop plan? Novak nodded grimly. Politics outranks experience today, Lieutenant. But remember, when the shooting starts, it's not about who gave the orders. It's about who's left standing when the smoke clears. So we're expendable, growled Sergeant Kowalski, the unit's heavy weapons specialist. We've always been expendable, Novak replied with a thin smile. That's why we're called Hell's Divers. The difference is, we come back from hell. A few grim chuckles rippled through the squad. These soldiers had seen it all. Plasma storms on Titan's moons. The flesh-melting acid rains of Kepler 442b. The gravity wells of collapsed neutron stars. They were humanity's finest. Chosen, not for their obedience to command, but for their uncanny ability to survive when the odds said they shouldn't. Check your gear, run final diagnostics, and get some rest, Novak ordered. Tomorrow, we remind the Alliance why humans are still in this fight. As the team dispersed, Novak felt a presence behind him. Lieutenant Silas stood awkwardly at the entrance to the bay, his tall frame silhouetted against the corridor lights. Captain Novak, the Keltian, began hesitantly. I wish to inform you that I've reviewed your combat records. Your unit's survival rate is statistically improbable. Novak raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment, Lieutenant? An observation, Silas replied. Keltian military doctrine emphasizes predictability and precision. Your methods appear chaotic, improvised, yet they produce results that our models cannot explain. That's because your models don't account for the human factor. Lieutenant, we're stubborn, we're adaptable, and we don't die easily. Keep that in mind when we're on the ground tomorrow. Silas tilted his head slightly, a Keltian gesture of consideration. I shall endeavor to integrate this human factor into my tactical assessments. Captain, as the Keltian departed, Novak turned back to his preparations, unable to shake the premonition that something on Garrus Prime was waiting for them, something beyond the scope of Alliance intelligence reports or Keltian simulations. The dropships shuddered violently as they plunged through Garrus Prime's upper atmosphere. Inside the lead vessel, Novak and his Hell's Divers were strapped into impact harnesses, their exoskeletons locked to the bulkheads. The interior was bathed in red emergency lighting, casting ominous shadows across the determined faces of his squad. "Atmospheric entry complete," announced the ship's AI. "Descent trajectory nominal. Estimated time to drop zone, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Novak activated the squad's secure comm channel. "Final equipment check, sound off." One by one, his team confirmed their readiness. Weapon systems online, shield generators primed, exoskeletons operating at optimal levels. These were the moments Novak both dreaded and lived for. The calm before the storm, when every heartbeat seemed louder than the engines propelling them toward danger. "Captain," Lieutenant Mara's voice cut through on a private channel. "Sensors are picking up unusual energy signatures from the surface. Doesn't match any known Garus weapons profiles." Before Novak could respond, the world exploded into chaos. "Incoming fire!" screamed the pilot. "Multiple anti-orbital batteries activating. Evasive Manu." The pilot's words were cut short as a blinding flash tore through the cockpit. The dropship lurched violently, sending loose equipment flying through the compartment. Emergency klaxons blared as the ship began an uncontrolled descent. "Brace for impact!" Novak shouted over the cacophony. "Prepare for emergency deployment." Through the viewport, Novak watched in horror as 3 other dropships disintegrated under concentrated fire from the surface. Brilliant energy beams lanced upward, transforming the Alliance vessels into expanding clouds of superheated debris. "Hull integrity compromised," the ship's AI announced with incongruous calm. "Emergency protocols engaged. Drop bay doors opening in 5, 4, 3. "Deploy now," Novak commanded. "Free fall formation Alpha." The Hell's divers detached from their harnesses as the bay doors beneath them yawned open, revealing the roiling clouds of Garus Prime's toxic atmosphere. Without hesitation, they leapt into the void, their exoskeletons automatically configuring for maximum aerodynamic efficiency. Novak was the last to jump, pausing only to activate the ship's self-destruct sequence. No Alliance technology could be allowed to fall into enemy hands. The free fall was both terrifying and exhilarating, plummeting through layers of caustic clouds. Novak monitored his squad's positions on his heads-up display. 6 signals blinked steadily, half his team. The others were either dead or their communication systems had been damaged. The ground rushed up to meet them at terminal velocity. At precisely the right moment, their exoskeletons deployed atmospheric braking systems, energy fields that created massive drag without generating the heat signature of traditional parachutes. Even so, the impact was bone-jarring as they slammed into the dusty surface of Garus Prime. Novak hit the ground in a controlled roll, his exoskeleton absorbing most of the kinetic energy. As he rose to a combat stance, his surroundings came into focus. A desolate wasteland of jagged rock formations and acidic sand dunes stretching to the horizon. "Status report," he barked into the comm. "Kowalski, operational. Mara, operational. Rodriguez, operational, but suit integrity at 70%. Chung, operational. Singh, operational with minor injuries. 6 out of 12. Half his team gone before the battle had even begun. Novak pushed down the grief that threatened to surface. There would be time for mourning later, if they survived. "Form defensive perimeter and scan for hostiles," he ordered. "Mara, see if you can establish contact with any surviving Pathfinders." As his team moved with practiced efficiency, Novak studied the terrain. They had landed nearly 20 kilometers from their intended drop zone, in the heart of the toxic desert known as the Searing Wastes. The acid content in the sand would eat through their exoskeleton seals within hours if they remained stationary. Lieutenant Mara approached, her helmet visor reflecting the pallid light of Garus Prime's distant sun. "Captain, I've detected Keltian emergency beacons approximately 3 kilometers northwest. Weak signals, possibly damaged equipment. Any contact with the fleet?" Mara shook her head. Massive electromagnetic interference. Something on this planet is generating a dampening field. We're effectively cut off. Novak considered their options. Standard protocol dictated they should proceed to the original objective, the Light Camp Fortress. But with half their strength gone, and no communication with command, the mission parameters had changed. We move northwest, he decided. If there are surviving Pathfinders, we'll need their navigation capabilities to reach the Light Camp. Kowalski, take point. Singh, watch our 6. Move out. As they traversed the hostile landscape, Novak couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The wind howled through twisted rock formations, carrying particles of corrosive dust that pitted their armor on contact. Overhead, Garrus Prime's 3 moons cast an eerie, shifting light across the terrain, creating phantasmal shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. After an hour of cautious advance, they crested a ridge overlooking a shallow depression. At the bottom lay the twisted wreckage of a Keltian dropship, its sleek design now reduced to scorched metal and scattered debris. Dark shapes moved among the ruins. Survivors. "Hold position," Novak ordered. "Mara, hail them on Alliance emergency frequencies." Before she could comply, one of the figures below looked up, its 4 eyes reflecting the moonlight. A Keltian voice crackled over their comms. "Human signatures detected. Identify yourselves immediately." "Captain Aaron Novak, Hell's Divers, Alliance Orbital Infantry." Novak responded. "We detected your distress beacon." A moment of silence followed, before the reply came. "Lieutenant Silas, Keltian Pathfinders. We have 3 survivors, 2 with significant injuries. Our navigation systems are non-functional." "Hold position, Lieutenant, we're coming down to you." As the Hell's Divers descended into the depression, Novak assessed the Keltian survivors. Silas appeared relatively unharmed, but his 2 companions were clearly in poor condition. One lay motionless on a makeshift stretcher, while the other sat propped against a section of hull. Dark Keltian blood seeping through improvised bandages. "Your timing is fortuitous, Captain," Silas greeted them, his normally precise diction strained with fatigue. "Commander Vex will not survive another night cycle without medical intervention, and Lieutenant Naren's mobility is severely compromised." Novak gestured for Singh, their medic, to examine the wounded Keltians. "What happened, Lieutenant?" "We lost half our dropships before we even reached the lower atmosphere." Silas's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of distress in Keltians. "The defense grid was unexpected. Our intelligence indicated minimal orbital defenses at this location. Instead, we encountered a fully operational array of Class 5 energy projectors. The General's tactical model failed. The admission clearly cost the proud Keltian. In their culture, acknowledging such a fundamental error was tantamount to admitting personal failure. "We need to reach the Light Camp," Novak stated, changing the subject. "That's still our primary objective." "Impossible," Silas replied. "Without navigation systems, we cannot traverse the searing wastes. The magnetic anomalies would disorient even the most experienced navigator." Mara stepped forward. "Captain, I've been analyzing the local topography. There's a network of canyons approximately 5 kilometers east that could provide both cover from orbital observation and protection from the acidic atmosphere." Novak nodded. "If we follow the canyons north, we might be able to circumvent the worst of the wastes and approach the Light Camp from an unexpected direction." "An unorthodox approach," Silas commented. "But under the circumstances, I defer to your experience in hostile terrain operations, Captain." Singh approached from where he had been treating the wounded Keltians. "Captain, Commander Vex is beyond our help. His neural system is shutting down. Lieutenant Naren can be stabilized, but he'll need to be carried." Novak met Silas's gaze. The Keltian officer stood rigidly, but grief was evident in the subtle drooping of his secondary eyelids. We'll carry Lieutenant Naren, Novak decided, and we'll bring Commander Vex's identification tags for return to his family. Keltians do not have families as humans understand them, Silas replied stiffly. But your gesture is appreciated, Captain. As Singh prepared Naren for transport, and Kowalski fashioned a stretcher from dropship debris. Novak took a moment to survey their surroundings. The wreckage of both human and Keltian vessels, scattered across Garrus Prime's surface, represented not just lost lives, but a catastrophic failure of Alliance military planning. The Keltian models, so revered by command, had proven woefully inadequate against the reality of Garrus defenses. Yet they had no choice but to press on. The Light Camp Fortress remained the key to securing a foothold on this hostile world, and despite their losses, the Hell's Divers and Pathfinders were still the only Alliance forces on the ground. We move out in 10 minutes, Novak announced. Our objective remains unchanged. We take the Light Camp or die trying. The journey through the canyon network was arduous and fraught with danger. Toxic pools of liquid collected at the lowest points, emitting vapors that would corrode unprotected flesh in seconds. Periodic acid rainstorms forced them to seek shelter beneath overhangs, huddling together as caustic droplets dissolved the exposed rock around them. Despite these challenges, the combined team made steady progress northward. Carrying Lieutenant Naren slowed their advance, but Novak refused to abandon the wounded Keltian. Such an action would violate not only Alliance protocols, but the Hell's Divers' unspoken code. No one gets left behind, regardless of species. On the third day of their trek, as they paused in a relatively protected alcove, Silas approached Novak with uncharacteristic hesitation. Captain, I find myself reconsidering certain assumptions about human combat methodology. The Keltian admitted. Your adaptability in this environment exceeds theoretical parameters. Novak suppressed a smile. Coming from a Keltian, this was practically effusive praise. Humans have always been good at surviving where we shouldn't, Lieutenant. It's practically our species-defining trait. Indeed, Silas agreed. Your species lacks the technological intuition of Keltians, the psionic abilities of the Threan collective, or the biological adaptability of the Morphin horde. Yet you persist, often thriving in conditions that should, by all logical analysis, lead to your extinction. We're too stubborn to die when the math says we should, Novak replied with a shrug. And we're too curious to stay in safe environments. It's gotten us into trouble more times than I can count. But it's also why we're here. Billions of light years from Earth, still fighting. Their conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Mara, who approached with urgency in her stride. Captain, sensors are picking up movement ahead. Multiple signatures, moving in formation. Definitely not natural fauna. Novak's expression hardened. Battle stations, Kowalski, secure R6. Mara, find a defensible position for Naren. Everyone else, combat ready. The team moved with silent efficiency, taking positions among the jagged rocks. Silas joined Novak at the forward observation point, his Keltian energy rifle humming softly as it charged. Garrus ground forces typically deploy in units of 9, Silas whispered. They favor encirclement tactics and rarely retreat once engaged. Novak nodded in acknowledgement. We'll let them pass if possible. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Direct confrontation isn't in our interest. For several tense minutes, they waited in silence. Then, moving with mechanical precision, a squad of Garrus soldiers entered the canyon below. Their armor, an unsettling amalgamation of technology and organic components, pulsed with internal light as they scanned their surroundings. Novak held his breath. The Garrus were moving perpendicular to their position, apparently unaware of the Alliance forces hiding above them. If they remained motionless, the patrol might pass without incident. Then, disaster struck. A section of rock beneath Singh's position gave way, sending a cascade of stones tumbling into the canyon. The noise, amplified by the narrow passage, echoed like thunder. The Garus squad reacted instantly, their weapons swiveling toward the source of the disturbance. "Engage!" Novak shouted, abandoning stealth for the advantage of initiative. The Hell's Divers opened fire in unison, their targeted bursts dropping 3 Garus soldiers before they could respond. Silas and his remaining Pathfinder joined the assault, their energy weapons cutting through the Garus armor with surgical precision. But the Garus were formidable opponents. They quickly recovered from the initial shock, taking cover and returning fire with devastating effect. Energy bolts and projectiles ricocheted off the canyon walls, filling the air with superheated particles and rock fragments. "Flanking maneuver," Novak commanded. "Kowalski, suppressing fire!" Sergeant Kowalski's heavy weapon roared to life, pinning down the Garus while Mara and Chung circled to attack from the side. Silas provided covering fire, his 4 eyes allowing him to track multiple targets simultaneously. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was, in reality, less than 10 minutes. When the final Garus fell, silence descended on the canyon once more, broken only by the hiss of cooling weapons and the labored breathing of the survivors. "Casualties?" Novak asked, scanning the battlefield. "Chung took a hit to the leg," reported Mara. "Rodriguez is dead." Another loss. Novak swallowed the bitter taste of failure. 5 Hell's Divers left out of his original 12. Silas approached, his armor scorched and pitted from enemy fire. "The Garus will send reinforcements when this patrol fails to report. We must move quickly." Novak nodded grimly. "Grab what supplies you can from the enemy. Their weapons. Anything useful. And Mara, retrieve Rodriguez's tags." As they prepared to move out, Novak knelt beside the fallen Hell's Diver. Rodriguez had been with him for 3 years, a solid soldier with a quiet sense of humor who had survived some of the most hellish combat zones in known space. Now, he lay still, his exoskeleton partially melted where a Garus energy bolt had penetrated the armor. "We'll remember," Novak whispered, the traditional farewell of the Hell's Divers. Then, with practiced movements, he removed Rodriguez's identification tags and the unit patch from his shoulder. Standing, Novak addressed the remaining team. "We're approximately 18 hours from the light camp at our current pace. The Garus know we're here now. From this point forward, we assume hostile contact is imminent and unavoidable." "Captain," Silas interjected, "I believe I can calibrate our sensors to detect Garus patrols at greater range if I integrate components from their fallen soldiers. It may provide us with a tactical advantage." "Do it," Novak ordered. "We'll need every edge we can get." As night fell on Garus Prime, the combined force of Hell's Divers and Pathfinders continued their northward journey. The distant silhouette of the Light Camp Fortress was now visible on the horizon, a monolithic structure of black stone and gleaming metal, pulsing with energy that painted the clouds above it in eerie, shifting colors. Lieutenant Naren, the wounded Keltian, drifted in and out of consciousness as they carried him. During one lucid moment, he grabbed Novak's arm with surprising strength. "The Light Camp," he rasped, his translator struggling to convert his weakened voice. "It's not what you think. There are anomalies. Signals that defy analysis." "What kind of anomalies?" Novak asked. "Quantum fluctuations. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist. As if something is bleeding through from another reality." Before Novak could press for more details, Naren lapsed back into unconsciousness, his grip slackening. "What was he talking about?" Novak asked Silas. The Keltian officer hesitated, his discomfort evident. "There are rumors among the scientific corps, theories about Garus Prime that were deemed too speculative for inclusion in official briefings." "I need to know what we're walking into, Lieutenant." Silas's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of internal conflict. "The Garus are known to practice forms of technology that border on what humans might call the supernatural. quantum manipulation beyond Alliance understanding. Some researchers believe they have found a way to harness the energy of consciousness itself. Novak frowned. You're saying they use souls as power sources? Not precisely, Silas corrected. Rather, they may have developed methods to interact with the quantum echoes left behind when consciousness ceases, what humans might poetically call ghosts. Under normal circumstances, Novak might have dismissed such talk as scientific speculation run amok. But there was something about this planet, a heaviness in the air, a strange quality to the light, that made the impossible seem plausible. Keep that information to yourself for now, he instructed Silas. The team has enough to worry about without adding ghost stories to the mix. Yet, as they drew closer to the light camp, Novak couldn't shake the sense that they were approaching something beyond the scope of conventional warfare. A confrontation not just with the Garus, but with forces that defied rational explanation. The final approach to the light camp occurred during Garrus Prime's brief twilight period, when all three moons aligned to cast long, distorted shadows across the landscape. The fortress loomed before them, its massive walls embedded into the living rock of the mountainside. No perimeter guards, observed Mara, scanning the ramparts with her enhanced optics. No visible defensive emplacements. That doesn't make sense, Kowalski muttered. This is supposed to be their primary defensive position in this hemisphere. Silas adjusted his sensor array, frowning at the readings. There are energy signatures within, but they're erratic, not consistent with standard Garrus technology. Could be a trap, suggested Singh. Novak studied the fortress through his tactical visor. The light camp's main entrance, a towering gateway of what appeared to be obsidian metal, stood partially open, revealing a darkened corridor beyond. Trap or not, this is our objective, he stated firmly. We secure this position, or the entire invasion fails. Mara, take point. Kowalski and Singh, you're on stretcher duty with Narin. Silas and I will cover our flanks. Chung, despite that leg, you're watching our six. Move out and stay alert for anything unusual. They approached the gateway with weapons ready, every sense straining for signs of ambush. The entrance corridor stretched before them, illuminated by strips of bioluminescent material that pulsed with a rhythm uncomfortably similar to a heartbeat. As they penetrated deeper into the fortress, the air grew heavier, charged with an energy that made their hair stand on end and caused intermittent static in their communication systems. The architecture was unlike anything Novak had encountered in previous engagements with the Garus. Organic curves melded seamlessly with geometric precision, creating spaces that seemed to defy conventional spatial relationships. Captain, Mara called from the point position. I'm detecting a large chamber ahead. Multiple heat signatures, but they're fluctuating, appearing and disappearing. Cloaking technology, Novak suggested. Silas shook his head. No known cloaking system produces these patterns. This is something else. They entered a vast, circular chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above. At the center stood a structure that defied easy description, a swirling vortex of energy contained within a framework of black metal, pulsing with colors that seemed to exist at the very edge of perceptible spectrum. "What the hell is that?" whispered Kowalski. Before anyone could respond, a voice echoed through the chamber, not transmitted through their communication systems, but somehow resonating directly in their minds. "You bring violence to our sanctuary, predictable, yet disappointing." Figures materialized around the perimeter of the room, Garus soldiers, their armor more elaborate than those they had encountered earlier. But there was something wrong about them. Their movements were too fluid, their forms occasionally transparent, as if they weren't fully present in physical space. A single Garus stepped forward, distinguished by ornate markings on its armor. "I am Commander Vexus of the Garus Ascendancy. You stand in the Chamber of Eternal Light, the nexus between the physical and the transcendent. Your presence here is a desecration." Novak kept his weapon trained on the commander. We claim this fortress in the name of the Alliance. Surrender your forces or be destroyed. A sound, like distant thunder, rolled through the chamber, the collective laughter of the Garus soldiers. You speak of destruction while standing at the threshold of immortality, Vexus replied. How typical of your limited perspective. The Light Camp is not a military installation as your Alliance understands it. It is a gateway, a means to transcend the limitations of physical existence. Silas stepped forward, his sensor array whirring as it analyzed the energy readings. The quantum fluctuations. You've created a dimensional rift. More than that, Keltian, Vexus corrected. We have bridged the gap between life and death itself. The consciousness of our fallen warriors remains here, their experiences and knowledge preserved and accessible. Death is merely a transition, not an end. As if to demonstrate, Vexus gestured toward the swirling vortex. The energy patterns shifted, and within the churning colors, faces began to appear. Garus faces, their expressions frozen in the moment of death, their eyes burning with an unnatural light. The souls of your dead, Novak realized with growing horror. Not souls, Vexus corrected. A primitive concept. These are quantum echoes, the imprint of consciousness preserved through advanced manipulation of dimensional energies. And soon, your echoes will join them, strengthening our collective. Without warning, the ghostly Garus soldiers attacked. Their weapons fired bolts of energy that seemed to phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to track. The Hell's Divers and Pathfinders responded instinctively, returning fire as they sought cover among the chamber's architectural features. Our weapons aren't effective, shouted Mara, as her shots passed harmlessly through several attacking figures. They're not fully materialized in our dimension. Silas adjusted his energy rifle, the weapon emitting a high-pitched whine as its settings changed. Modulate your weapons to pulse frequency. It disrupts their quantum coherence. Novak relayed the instruction to his team, and they quickly adapted their tactics. The modified weapons proved more effective, causing the ghostly Garus to flicker and temporarily disperse when hit. But for every attacker they disabled, two more seemed to emerge from the swirling vortex at the chamber's center. We need to shut down that portal, Novak shouted over the cacophony of battle. Silas, options? The Keltian officer fired a precise burst that dispersed 3 advancing enemies before responding. The structure appears to be drawing power from multiple sources. If we could overload the main conduits, there, and there, it might collapse the field. Novak assessed their increasingly desperate situation. Kowalski was down, a spectral energy bolt having penetrated his armor. Singh was desperately trying to stabilize him while maintaining a defensive position around the still unconscious Narin. Chung's injured leg had given out, forcing him to fight from a stationary position that made him vulnerable. Only Mara remained fully mobile, her lightning-fast reflexes keeping her one step ahead of the ghostly attackers. Cover me, Novak commanded. I'm going for the first conduit. He sprinted across the chamber, dodging energy bolts and ghostly figures that reached for him, with hands that seemed to burn cold where they touched. Reaching the first power conduit, a pulsing column of light and machinery, he planted an explosive charge from his combat kit and set the timer. First charge set, moving to second position. As Novak fought his way toward the second conduit, Commander Vexus stepped into his path, the Garus leader's form flickering between solid and transparent states. Your efforts are futile, human, Vexus stated, his voice resonating painfully in Novak's mind. Your alliance fails to comprehend the true nature of this conflict. It is not about territory or resources, but evolution itself. The Garus have transcended the limitations of physical existence. We cannot be defeated by conventional means. Maybe not, Novak replied, raising his weapon. But we can still make your existence really uncomfortable. He fired a sustained burst directly at Vexus, forcing the commander to shift fully into his spectral state to avoid damage. Using the momentary advantage, Novak lunged past him toward the second conduit. Across the chamber, disaster struck. A concentrated attack overwhelmed Chung's position. The wounded Hell's Diver fought valiantly, taking several ghostly Garus with him before an energy bolt struck him directly in the chest, burning through his armor and the flesh beneath. "Cheng!" Mara cried out, momentarily distracted by her comrade's fall. In that instant of inattention, a Garrus soldier materialized behind her, its weapon pressed against her armor. Before Novak could shout a warning, the weapon discharged at point-blank range, sending Mara crumpling to the floor. "No!" Novak roared, abandoning his approach to the second conduit to rush to Mara's side. But Silas was closer. The Keltian officer moved with surprising speed, dispatching the Garus soldier with a precise shot before kneeling beside the fallen Hell's Diver. "She's alive, but critically injured." Rage and desperation fueled Novak's next actions. 4 of his Hell's Divers were now down: Kowalski, Chung, Mara, and Singh, who had taken a glancing hit while defending Narin. Only Novak remained combat effective, alongside Silas and his single remaining Pathfinder. "New plan," Novak growled. "We overload the central vortex directly. Silas, get the wounded to the entrance corridor. I'll handle this." "That's suicide, Captain," Silas objected. "The energy backlash will—" "That's an order, Lieutenant. Get them out now." Something in Novak's tone, a finality, a certainty, caused the Keltian to hesitate only briefly before nodding. "It has been an honor fighting alongside you, Captain Novak." As Silas and his Pathfinder began the difficult process of moving the wounded, Novak turned toward the central vortex. The swirling energy had intensified during the battle, the faces within it more numerous and distinct. Among them, Novak thought he glimpsed human features, perhaps hallucinations, perhaps something more sinister. Commander Vexus materialized before him, blocking his path. "Your sacrifice will be for nothing, human. Your consciousness will simply join our collective, your knowledge and experiences added to our own." "There's something you don't understand about humans, Commander," Novak replied, activating all his remaining explosive charges simultaneously. "We don't go quietly, and we sure as hell don't follow the rules." With a defiant battle cry, Novak charged directly at Vexus, catching the Garrus commander off guard. They collided at the edge of the vortex, the impact sending them both tumbling toward the swirling energy. Vexus's form flickered rapidly between physical and spectral states, his control compromised by the unexpected physical assault. As they fell toward the heart of the vortex, Novak released the armed explosives, allowing them to tumble ahead into the churning energy. Vexus realized the human's intent too late. "No, you cannot!" The explosion was like nothing Novak had ever experienced. It wasn't merely physical. It seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The vortex collapsed inward, then expanded in a silent shockwave that rippled through dimensions beyond human comprehension. Novak felt himself falling, not through space but through layers of existence. Ghostly faces rushed past him, some Garus, some human, all bearing expressions of shock and pain. Among them, he recognized the features of his fallen Hell's Divers, not just from this mission, but from every drop he had commanded over his career. Then, in the midst of cosmic chaos, a hand grasped his, solid, real, human. Novak looked up to see Rodriguez, the Hell's Diver, who had fallen in the canyon battle. Behind him stood the ghostly forms of the other Hell's Divers lost during the drop: Chen, Ivanova, Petrov, Washington, Jackson. "We never left, Captain," Rodriguez said, his voice somehow clear despite the dimensional maelstrom surrounding them. "Hell's Divers complete the mission. Always." More hands reached for him, the spectral hands of his fallen soldiers, their forms growing more substantial as they pulled him back from the collapsing vortex. Their faces, once frozen in death, now showed determination and purpose. The light camp must fall, Novak gasped, struggling to maintain consciousness as reality itself seemed to fracture around him. The Alliance needs this foothold. And they'll have it, promised Washington, her ghostly form positioning itself between Novak and the approaching wave of furious Garus specters. We'll hold them back. You finish the mission. With a final, desperate surge of strength, the ghostly Hells Divers pushed Novak clear of the vortex's immediate effect radius. He landed hard on the chamber floor, his armor cracked and smoking, his consciousness fading. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the spectral forms of his fallen soldiers engaging the Garus in combat that transcended physical limitations. A battle of will and consciousness that defied scientific explanation. Novak's return to consciousness was gradual and painful. He became aware first of the steady beep of medical equipment, then the antiseptic smell of an Alliance medical bay. When he finally managed to open his eyes, the harsh white light sent spikes of pain through his skull. "He's awake," announced a voice nearby. "Alert the general." Blinking to clear his vision, Novak found himself looking up at a medical officer, human, wearing the insignia of the Alliance Fleet Medical Corps. "The light camp," Novak croaked, his throat raw and parched. "Did we—" "Easy, Captain," the medic soothed, adjusting something on Novak's intravenous line. "You've been unconscious for nearly 2 weeks. A lot has happened." Before Novak could demand clarification, the door to his room slid open, admitting General Theron and, to Novak's surprise, Lieutenant Silas. The Keltian officer moved with a slight limp, his normally immaculate uniform bearing evidence of recent field repairs. "Captain Novak," the general greeted him with unexpected warmth. "It is gratifying to see you recovering." Novak struggled to sit up, wincing as pain flared across his torso. "Report, General. What happened after the explosion?" General Theron and Silas exchanged a glance that contained volumes of unspoken communication. "The light camp has been secured," the general stated. "In fact, the entire northern hemisphere of Garus Prime is now under Alliance control. The Garus resistance collapsed shortly after the incident at the fortress." "Incident," Novak repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Silas stepped forward. "What occurred in the Chamber of Eternal Light defies conventional explanation. Captain, when the vortex collapsed, it appeared to destabilize the quantum cohesion of the Garus forces across the entire region. Their technology, which apparently relied on the same principles as the vortex, simply ceased functioning." "And my team?" Novak asked, dreading the answer. "The Hells Divers?" Another uncomfortable glance between the general and Silas. "Lieutenant Mara survived her injuries," Silas reported. "As did Sergeant Kowalski, though he lost his left arm below the elbow. Singh did not survive. Neither did Chung. As for the others who were lost during the initial drop, their bodies were never recovered," finished the general. "But that is to be expected given the circumstances of the drop and the hostile environment." Novak closed his eyes, memories of the spectral battle flashing through his mind. Had it been real? A hallucination induced by proximity to the vortex? Or something beyond current scientific understanding? "There's something else you should know, Captain," Silas added hesitantly. "When Alliance forces secured the light camp, they found something unexpected in the chamber." "What?" "The identification tags of every Hells Diver lost during the mission, arranged in a perfect circle at the exact center where the vortex had been. No explanation for how they got there. All recovery teams were accounted for, and none reported placing the tags." A chill ran down Novak's spine. "And the Garus commander, Vexus?" "No trace," replied the general. "Neither of him, nor any of the other Garus forces that were present in the chamber. It's as if they simply ceased to exist." Novak absorbed this information in silence. There were no words in any Alliance language to adequately describe what he had experienced, what he believed had occurred. The Hell's Divers, even in death, had completed their mission. They had held the line against forces that defied comprehension, giving their final service to the Alliance and to humanity. "There's one more thing, Captain," Silas said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Something that may interest you. Would you like to see outside?" Curious, despite his fatigue. Novak nodded. With the help of the medic, he was assisted into a hover chair and guided to the viewport of the medical bay. Outside, the stars shone with cold brilliance against the void of space. "I don't understand," Novak admitted. "What am I looking for?" Silas directed his attention to a particular constellation, visible from their position. The astronomers noticed it 3 days after the battle, a new configuration of stars in the northern hemisphere of Garrus Prime, visible only from the planet's surface. 12 stars, arranged in a pattern that, well, see for yourself. He handed Novak a datapad displaying an astronomical image. The pattern was unmistakable, 12 stars positioned in the exact formation of the Hell's Divers insignia. "This is impossible," Novak whispered. "Stars don't just reposition themselves." "Indeed they don't," agreed Silas. "Yet, there it is, visible to anyone who looks up from the surface of Garrus Prime. The Alliance Scientific Corps has no explanation. Some of the more poetically inclined soldiers have taken to calling it the Diver's Watch." Novak stared at the image, his mind wrestling with implications that transcended scientific understanding. In that moment, he chose to believe, not because it was logical or provable, but because it honored the sacrifice of his team. The Hell's Divers had defied death itself to complete their mission, and now they watched over the world they had helped secure. "The memorial service for the fallen is scheduled for next week," the general informed him. "All 12 Hell's Divers will receive the Alliance Cross of Valor posthumously." 12? Novak questioned. "But Mara and Kowalski survived." "I was referring to the original team," clarified the general. "Your personnel file will show that you are the sole survivor of the Garrus Prime operation. Lieutenant Mara and Sergeant Kowalski have been reassigned to the newly formed Special Operations Unit, the Nameless Souls. It seems your unconventional tactics have inspired some revisions to Alliance military doctrine." After the general and Silas departed, leaving him alone with the stars, Novak reflected on the nature of sacrifice and memory. The Hell's Divers had always been considered expendable, sent into the most dangerous situations with the lowest probability of survival. Yet they had proven, on Garrus Prime, that death was not necessarily the end of service. In the days that followed, as Novak slowly recovered his strength, he found himself often drawn to the viewport, gazing at the distant stars and wondering about the true nature of consciousness and existence. The official reports classified the Garrus Prime operation as a qualified success with acceptable casualties. The truth, that the spirits of fallen soldiers had somehow transcended death to complete their mission, would never appear in any Alliance document. But on clear nights, when the 3 moons of Garrus Prime aligned in the sky, observers on the planet's surface would report strange phenomena, phantom figures patrolling the perimeter of the light camp, their forms translucent, yet unmistakably human in silhouette. And in the northern auroras, patterns sometimes formed that resembled falling figures, wreathed in flame, Hell's Divers, eternally dropping into battle, their service extending beyond the boundaries of life itself. Captain Aaron Novak would eventually return to active duty, leading a new generation of Hell's Divers into combat zones across the galaxy. But he never forgot the lessons of Garrus Prime, that the bonds forged in battle could transcend even death, that humanity's greatest strength lay not in technology or tactical doctrine, but in unwavering determination and loyalty. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between missions, he would look up at the stars and offer a silent salute to the constellation that shouldn't exist, the eternal watch of the Hell's divers, defiant beyond the grave.